Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is another interview, and this one is a bit different than the other ones that I've done previously in that it's not technically with someone who currently works as an archaeologist. Today's guest is award-winning author EK Johnston. She has published 12 books, 4 of which are within the Star Wars universe. Our connection comes from the fact that we went to the same program at the Wilfrid Laurier University in Near Eastern Archaeology and studied there. She was a few years ahead of me, but not so far ahead that we didn't cross paths in 2011 while on field school in Jordan. Field school forges some very strong bonds, and since then we've always been connected through social media. And the reason this interview came about was that I posted on my personal Facebook about the interview I did with our old professor, Dr. PM Michelle Davio. Kate reached out to me after seeing the video because she had recently been reliving a lot of her Jordan memories, and we connected, and then we came up with the idea for doing this video. I thought this video would be interesting for you guys because she is a really great example of somebody who has studied archaeology both as an undergraduate and then at the University of Bradford for a master's. And then after her degrees, instead of becoming an archaeologist, she ended up becoming something related but kind of completely different. And she's obviously made a real success story out of that. Today's interview is going to obviously discuss her written achievements and success as an author, but through a more archaeological lens and focusing more on why she decided to study archaeology, what she studied, and then also how her education in archaeology has transferred into her career as a writer. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. All right, so I'm so honored today to have EK Johnston, who I actually know because we went to field school together in my second year in Jordan in 2011. We were both supervisors in, I think, the same field, and we just kind of bonded over looking after our volunteers. I very distinctly remember one particular volunteer. We thought that someone was giving her a hard time, and you came to me and you're like, I think this person's having a hard time. I think we should go support her. And we together, we sat this girl down and we were like, we just want you to know that if you're having any problems or you need any help with anything, like, we're here for you. So it was like a really great, and that's like my fondest and most standout memory of you together. But thank you so much for coming on the channel today. You are an author, so you're not technically an archaeologist before,
No.
but as you said when you contacted me for the interview, you still use your degree in archaeology a lot in what you have done for your career path as well. I think it's really interesting to see someone who has studied archaeology and then gone on to a different but related career path, because I think a lot of people think, oh, if I study archaeology, I have to become an archaeologist. So I think you're a really great example of somebody who's done that and then gone away and done something else and done it really successfully. First question today is, what inspired you to study archaeology?
To be quite honest with you, I don't exactly remember. I always loved dinosaurs and stuff. And I thought, paleontology is cool. And by the time I hit high school history, I realized that I very much preferred people because they make stuff. So I thought, I guess I'm going to be a historian. You can study history at university, that'll be fine. And then in grade 11, I learned that Laurier had a Near Eastern archaeology program. And this was back when we still had OAC, or nobody at my high school was asking, have you thought about university yet? Because it was at the time too early. But I had already decided I was going to Laurier. And my guidance counselor thought I was nuts. My parents thought I was nuts. I did not change my mind over the course of the next 2 3/4 years.
Yeah.
And I ended up going. So I think really it was almost a little bit chicken and egg, where I was interested in something and then I found out that you could go to school for it. Grade 11 was also, not coincidentally, I think, the year that I took an ancient history class for the first time, where we actually spent time studying Egypt and Mesopotamia. And I remember reading in a textbook that Mesopotamian religion was dark and scary because the rivers were unpredictable. And Egyptian religion was very sort of methodical and very timely because the Nile was so
methodical and timely.
And I remember thinking, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I want to learn more about this type of stuff. and that's kind of how I ended up going.
So is it because you studied ancient history in your ancient history class, Egypt and Mesopotamia? Is that why you chose the Near Eastern program at Laurier, or did you look at other programs, or did you just think this would be interesting?
I did look at other programs. I was quite intimidated at the idea of having to learn Greek, which was why I decided not to do class. Joke's on me. Turns out Hebrew.
Yeah,
not a walk in the park. I think what it came down to for me was the thing I liked about the Middle East was that, or the Near East as we called it, was that it had everything. You could do the Roman Near East, you could do the Greek Near East, you could do the Egyptian Near East, you could do, Syro-Palestinian, blah, 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 whatever. And I kind of liked that overlap. What eventually I would come to focus on in my studies or in my interest was trade and sort of the relationships between humans. It's really a crossroads in a lot of ways, the Near East, people going from one place to another, and they always have done. It's not like travel and commerce is new. And I like that a lot. And I like the idea of human connection. So I might have been initially drawn in by flashy Egyptian statues, but I stayed for that like human connection.
Oh, that's very similar to mine. My entire growing up, my mom and my grandmother's house was like decorated with like an ancient Egypt theme, which 100% just is what dialed me towards studying. I wanted to be an Egyptologist. The Near East program at Laurier, I was like, yes, okay, this is where I can start. And then as I went on, I found I was more into the osteo stuff, which is what I ended up doing a master's in. And speaking of masters, you then went on after to do a master's. So what did you do it in? Where did you do it?
So my master's is a Master of Science in Forensic Archaeology and Crime Scene Investigation.
Oh,
from the University of Bradford in the UK.
Right.
I knew I wanted to go to the UK for my master's because at the time they were a little bit ahead on archaeological theory. I don't know if that's still the case, but they were a little bit ahead in terms of incorporating technology and all that kind of stuff. And they had a difference between forensic archaeology and forensic anthropology. I wanted that difference. So the idea of being like the actual recovery on the archaeology side versus the analysis on the anthropology side. I wanted the sort of recovery basis, which is why I picked that program. I learned everything from like how to take apart a car to how to search houses for hidden spaces, but it was still the sort of same excavation techniques you use, the mindset that you use. And I will always remember in the osteo class that you take at Laurier, the black bag that Dr. Knight has, that you have to like put your hands in the black bag and identify bones by touch.
Right.
And we're always like, this is the dumbest thing. I have done that so many times since then, where it's just like you're digging in mud or like you can't see what you're doing and you have to be like, well, this is a femur. Like, it's so funny that like, why are we doing this? And it turns out to be kind of useful. But I knew that I didn't want to be a police officer. I thought I was going to get a PhD. So I came home after that and I sort of reassessed where I was going to go and started planning again.
Building on that, you didn't end up going to get a PhD. Instead, you became what is that an even more mythical thing, which is a successful author.
It is kind of ridiculous to say it out loud.
Tell us a bit more about how you got from thinking about doing a PhD or finishing a master's in the UK, coming home, and then doing your writing career and what it's been like.
I had the unfortunate timing of graduating from my master's into the 2008 recession.
Yeah. Okay.
So a lot of American schools weren't taking Canadian students at the time. I had applied to the University of Florida, which involved taking the GRE, which was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. Then later I would apply to Penn State, but in both cases, they weren't looking for Canadians. Eventually, I kind of went back to my roots, such as it is. And in the 2011 Medania season in Jordan, Michael Weigel and I kind of strategized what I was going to do next. And he wanted me to go to either Vienna or Leicester and do more of a survey-oriented PhD. And we were going to do the watchtowers that dot the borders of the Medania site. I was really excited about it because it was landscape use, how they used the hills to protect the lowlands, basically, how they got the rocks up to the top of the hills, like all that kind of stuff. I did get accepted to Leicester, but the finances, I just didn't have the finances. So we ended up not going. Had been writing the whole time. So I'd been writing fan fiction all through university. And in 2009, I had actually written my first novel. It's terrible. No one will ever read it.
I think that's a very common thing that I see from a lot of authors. They say like, you just write, keep writing, and whatever you start to produce at the beginning is terrible, but eventually it gets better.
2011 was my last field season. And when I got home from that season, the November afterwards, I actually wrote the novel that was my first book. As I was sort of coming to grips with not going back to school ever again, I was also, editing this novel and trying to find an agent and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of like I went from, one dream job to the next, which makes it sound like it was fun. It was not.
No, okay.
There was like a decade of suffering in there.
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of regrets because I
Yeah.
got to learn a lot. I got to see a lot. I got to meet fascinating people.
Mm,
And now I still get to do all that stuff.
yeah.
Just they like Star Wars instead of like weird pottery
Ancient
forms that
Egypt
no one's
and
ever heard
stuff.
of. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I correct in thinking that you worked at Chapters for a while?
I did. I worked at
Yeah.
Chapters from 2007 until 2015.
I took a year off between Laurier and coming to Edinburgh and studying here for university. I applied for a job at the Waterloo chapters and I got it. And it was like, as a bookworm,
Yeah.
it was like my dream job. I worked there for maybe like 4 or 5 months. And then I got offered a contract as a field tech at ARA,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Knight's commercial archaeology company. And I was like, well, I can't really pass this up. Like, this is a chance to work as an archaeologist. So I had to leave. So you wrote your first book that ended up being your first book published right after you came back from your last season in Jordan. How long did that take you to write, and what was the process like for getting it published?
So my first book was called The Story of Owen,
Yeah.
and I wrote it for NaNoWriMo in 2011, which is National
All right.
Novel Writing Month. Basically, you try to write 50,000 words in the month of November, and you compete against yourself on the internet, and then like thousands of people cheer you on if you
Oh,
want them to. It's
that's
really
nice.
sweet because you don't have to talk to anybody. It's perfect for introverts. So I had done some planning for the book in the spring, but I was kind of thinking ahead, like, I'm going to go to Jordan. I'm going to have to find a job when I get home. I'm going to like have to figure all this stuff out. I got home from Jordan. I started working at Chapters, but I wrote the book in the draft anyway during that month of November.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just went to the Starbucks and wrote after work when I didn't have to work all the time. I managed to finish the draft. I put it away for the month of December because I was tired.
Mm-hmm.
And then in January, I started to work on it again. And a few of my author friends had volunteered to look at it for me, which was wonderful. They gave me great notes. And then at the beginning of April, an editor by the name of Andrew Carr issued an open call, which almost never happens. Many of the things I'm about to tell you about are like pie in the sky. I can't believe that happened to you. Other authors put their teeth and smile at me, like that kind of thing. I had done the draft. It was on its like third or fourth draft by the time Andrew issued his open call. So I sent it to him on April 2nd. Tessa Grattan, a friend who had read it, emailed him and was like, they had worked together on a different project, and said, Andrew, I think you should read this book. So he emailed me on Wednesday to say he was starting it. He emailed me on Thursday to say he was finished it. And he called on Friday with an offer to buy it. And I was like, that would be great. Let me talk to my agent, which I did not have. And so I had also sent the book out to 5 agents that I really wanted. And so I emailed the one that I wanted the most and was like, hello, I'm pretty sure Andrew Carr is going to buy my book. Do you want to be my agent? And he was like, I'll call you on Monday. And so he did, and we did, and like it all worked out. But it was like, that does not happen under normal circumstances. Like nobody goes from submission to agent and editing deal in less than a week. We ended up with this deal, and then it was announced, and then the book was actually published 2 years later because everything in publishing takes forever. So that's kind of how the first one came about. It sold in 2012, and then it kind of went from there.
Well, congratulations. Belated congratulations. So explain to me a little bit more about how you've incorporated archaeology into your process and your writing.
I think it's 2 major ways: research and time management. Research is something, it turns out, that not everyone is good at, which I never really thought about because I am good at it.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was like, oh, my parents just don't understand Google. That's why they can't use it. But I will always remember one time I was finishing up my master's thesis, and I was back in Canada, and I had to get a book from the University of Guelph. So my older brother drove me to Guelph. We met up with his friend who worked there, who could like get us into the library quickly. And I just walked right to the shelf and picked the book up. It was like on the 3rd floor, blah, 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 whatever. And they were both like, how did you do that? I'm like, the shelves are numbered and it's organized by subject. Like, I just know where the books are. And like that was kind of when it occurred to me that like research was something you could be taught, and it turns out Dr. Davio was quite good at teaching us how to do it. In addition to that, because I have done so much research on various things, I have a fairly broad general knowledge base, which comes in very handy. There's a lot of very random things that I've picked up over the years for archaeology that I've retained for some reason, and can sort of bring out at random moments when it's useful. The time management thing, I think, comes down to writing very specific amounts of pages on a very specific timeline. When you go on a field school, for example, you dig for 5.5 weeks and then you have 3 days to produce a report that's going to be submitted to the Ministry of Antiquities. And like, there's no extension. You have to get it done. You do what you can to sort of plan it leading up to that final 3 days, but the final 3 days, you really just kind of have to buckle down and do it. And I always tell people, when Dr. Davio asked for a 5-page paper, she did not mean 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
She meant like the bottom 2 lines of the 5th page. And for me, that's really helped me when I'm stuck on, if I'm having writer's block or whatever, I'll just be like, okay, just write 4 pages about this random topic that's important to the book. And it turns out that I can make it fit into 4 pages, and then you can edit it so that it's good later, but at least it will be long enough.
Yes.
So the idea of producing words under pressure and to a timeline is something I've very much taken from those classes.
That's how archaeology has helped you in terms of becoming successful and managing your time in terms of your career. Are there other strengths or qualifications maybe related to archaeology or whatever that you think helped you in becoming a successful author besides having a really high amount of luck?
I think the travel experience, and not just as a tourist, is a big deal. Like, I was a tourist in Egypt. You get certain sides of the country. I don't consider myself a tourist in Jordan. We did tourist things in Jordan.
Yeah.
But I consider myself sort of this like weird gray area of not quite a tourist, getting to see more of the everyday lives and like living in the hotel for 6 weeks and, accidentally going to weddings and like all that kind of stuff.
Getting to know people.
Getting to know people year after year after year was something that I really valued. And I think it just sort of, because I'm from a super small town in southwestern Ontario. There's like 500 people in it. Like, I had been to Australia and I had been to New Zealand and I had been to Scotland, but it was my first sort of real trip out in the world. It felt like I didn't have parents with me. I was, they didn't speak English. The food was like, ? I don't know. I'm going to eat it to be polite and hope for the best. Like, turns out I like most of it, which is nice. I think it was my first experience with another culture that was drastically different from mine. And sort of the concessions you have to make because you're not a tourist. I always remember Dr. Davio saying things like, oh, we have to do this because we're staying, because we're coming back. Right? Like, if we were passing through town, you could wear a tank top because they're never going to see you again. But we have to live here, so you have to wear sleeves. And that was kind of my approach to a lot of life after that, was, the places that you live, the places that you work, and the places that you're just passing through. So a lot of my worldview and a lot of my sort of cultural acceptances are based on what I learned and saw and kind of experienced there.
Obviously, writing, as a writer, as an author, writing is a pretty big part of your career. What are other aspects of it that are involved that maybe people wouldn't normally think about?
You spend so much time doing emails. Writing is about 50% writing and about 50% administration. When you get to the part where you're a published author, you're responsible for a lot of your own marketing. You're responsible for a lot of your own publicity, and you have to sort of become comfortable speaking in public in a way that I definitely was not. When I got started, you kind of become not exactly a brand. I joke that it's the brand, but like, it's not exactly a brand, but you become your own spokesperson, right? So
you're your own best advocate.
When you do a school visit, or like the kind of personality you present on Twitter, and the kind of personality you want to have online and all that kind of stuff, you don't have to do any of those things. There are many authors that are perfectly happy with no online presence. Children still love them, but I find the community aspect of talking with other writers and of interacting with readers and librarians and teachers to be worth being online. Basically.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Because I'm a relatively safe person online, like I'm the nice white lady from Canada. Because I'm a relatively safe online person, I try to keep in mind that I can go into spaces that other people might not be able to go into. And then I can make sure that I leave the door open behind me.
Yeah.
I try to make sure that, if I'm invited to a school visit in Toronto, for example, I will say, oh, have you heard of Sarah Raleigh? Have you heard of, forgotten everyone's name? There's just so many authors of color in Toronto right now. And I'm like, have you heard of these people? Like, would you like them to come instead? They're people who also deserve the screen time and the playtime that I'm getting. With that, I've been able to sort of like mentor people and sort of make CanLit a little bit bigger, which is nice because CanLit's very small. So it's kind of nice to have the option of being able to like make more room for people, because people did that for me. Like that's how I got into publishing, was people made room for me, and the least I can do is make room for other people. And I think what it comes to online is, helping people decide how they're going to curate their online personality. Something I always tell new authors, and something I'm very public about with my own online, is that you get to decide what people see of you. Yeah. So like everything I do online is 100% genuine, but it's not 100% of my life.
Yeah. Is that why you go by EK Johnston?
It kind of, actually. It was an unforeseen side effect. I originally picked EK because initials seemed to work out okay for C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And then I realized very quickly that because it was EK, people who don't know me will say Emily or Emily Kate. But if someone says, oh, hey, Kate, I'll be like, I've met this person before and I should know who they are. And then when the Star Wars books started coming out, the Star Wars fan called me EK. Because before that, I was mostly talking to librarians, so it made sense that they would use a name. Yeah. But my readership jumped astronomically when the Ahsoka book came out. And the Star Wars people really started calling me EK, and that's become much more of my professional
Nomer. Yeah. Tell me how the hell you got onto the Star Wars roster, because that's like so cool. I have Baby Yoda really wants to know.
This one was actually a sort of strange kind of culmination of events. Cast your mind back, if you will, to the year 2014. But I'd been working at Chapters at that point for like 6 years. And I was starting to get frustrated by the fact that there were Star Wars books in literally every section of the store except YA. And so I was like, they're going to realize it someday. And I want someone in the room to know what my name is when they do. When we sold 1,000 Nights and Spindle, which are my third and sixth books, we sold them to Disney Hyperion for a variety of reasons. But one of the like background things in my mind was they're going to have that meeting someday and someone's going to know what my name is. Unbeknownst to me, they'd already had that meeting. They announced the first line of books that was going to come out. The first YA book was Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. It is outstanding. I love every part of it. It came out in 2015 as part of the lead up to The Force Awakens. But in 2014, my first book, The Story of Owen, was nominated for a fairly major literary award in the United States. And the morning the nominations were announced, I woke up. I was too excited to sleep. It was like 8:30 in the morning. It was going to be half an hour before the announcement was made. I was like, I have to do something. So I wrote a proposal for 3 Star Wars books. And I sent it to my agent at 9 o'clock. He called at 13 minutes after 9 and was like, I really like this idea. We should definitely send it to your Disney editor and see if she knows anybody. So he did. And then she called me about noon and was like, congratulations on being nominated. This looks fantastic. I'm going to send it to our Star Wars guy. And 2 days later, Mike Siglane, the Star Wars guy, called. He said, well, they're putting together some movies right now, because it was December of 2014. They were just a little bit putting together some movies, and we'll be in touch. And I was like, that's fine. Like, I'm on the list. That's all I wanted. And then in August, they asked if I wanted to write an Ahsoka YA. And I was like, I would love to write an Ahsoka YA. It took a while to get everyone together because of the movie production and stuff. So in February of 2016, we had a phone call with Dave Filoni and the Story Group and me and Mike Siglane. And we sort of hammered out what the book was going to be about. And then it just kind of went from there. So it's definitely a case of like putting myself out there. Yeah. But, I'd been writing for 5 years at that point. I had an agent and I was reliable. Yeah. So they knew I could produce books.
Wow. That's really interesting. And a good example of it, like you being your own best advocate and not just
it's one of the most ambitious things I've ever done.
Well, congratulations. You're now an official writer for Star Wars. It's just like the fact that I know someone who like writes for Star Wars is something that blows my mind whenever I think about it. All right, we'll move back into some archaeology questions. What is your best and worst field experiences?
Oh man, all of my worst field experiences involve peeing in the desert while having my period.
Fair enough.
Right? Like they all suck. Not
Yeah.
fun. Definitely take some sort of medication to avoid that if you can. So many like random moments that I just remember because they were funny. A lot of them involved dancing on the roof at Lulu's. But I think the best thing I did in field school was we went to Wadi Rum one of the weekends. We drove down on Friday night. We drove out into the desert, and then we hiked on Saturday. And on Friday night, I remember going to sleep, and one of the guys was like, we dragged our mattresses out onto the desert. And one of the guys was like, what time do you think the moon's going to set? And I was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 probably. And he was like, do you think you'll wake up? And I was like, I will definitely wake up because it'll be cold by then. So I remember waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and like literally grabbing the edge of my mattress because the Milky Way was so, like I've seen the Milky Way before, but not like this. Like it was so bright and so close. And I was like, I'm going to fall into it. And like, it was just so dead quiet, like no lights, no sounds. That there had been a generator earlier. Like everything was totally quiet, and just being like, Robert, wake up. Robert, wake up and look at the stars. Like it was really funny. That's probably one of my better memories of being there. But there's so many.
What's the favorite thing that you've ever discovered or found on an archaeological project?
This is going to be like peak nerd. I just need you to understand that.
Okay.
So I spent most of my time at Caravan Albadania digging in Field B, which was an industrial building. It was actually 2 industrial buildings back to back. So I dug in the actual buildings themselves for the first 2 years. And then the rest of the years I was digging in the street, which we called D East, just outside. And so I got to dig out both doorways to the buildings and all that kind of stuff, but we'd always dug north-south. So the last year I was there, we dug east-west. We dug from the building in Field B to the building in Field D. And we had this beautiful profile at the end of the season, because the bedrock wasn't that far down. So we had this beautiful profile at the end of the season of the wall construction in B and the wall construction in D, and then the first layer of soil deposition going down one across the street and up the other. So we were able to tie the 2 edges of the street together, or at least those 2 buildings together in time, because we knew when the dirt had gone in. It's probably the most like archaeologically significant thing I've ever found. But I remember, because I had a few students working in that square at the time, obviously, and they were like, I just feel like we're finding a lot of garbage. And I'm like, you're finding what might be the most important thing they do this season. Like, just because we've never been able to tie Field B and Field D together like this before. So it was kind of nice to have that moment of like, and I remember like Dr. Davio standing beside me on one side, and the photographer, and then Michael, and everyone's like taking a million pictures, and Tori, one of my first years, is like spraying it very carefully to get like the good profile. And like Tori was like, I don't understand why everyone is so excited. I'm like, I'll explain it to you later. It's so weird to explain it because it wasn't even a thing. It was literally just dirt that happened to be on 2 buildings, but I still have pictures. It's like that 10YR 7/4. You can see the lines, and it's beautiful.
Oh, that's lovely. That's a really, really interesting answer to that question, because usually, obviously, and including myself, people say objects. What are your favorite archaeology, historic fiction related books or book series?
I really enjoy Joe Graham and Melissa Scott's Story of the Air books. They deal with archaeology to varying degrees. It's basically magic, airplanes, archaeology, and like sliding into World War II. So it's these people like coming out of the Depression, really in the like heyday of not great archaeology, but these people are good at it. And kind of getting ready for, like, Europe is very obviously ramping up into World War II, but the stories themselves are more about like, there's an Egyptian dig and there's a Hawaiian dig and there's a couple of things in North America and then one in Italy. But I think my favorite one, as ridiculous as this is, Dr. Davio told us on a near weekly basis that we should read Come Tell Me How You Live by Agatha Christie. And to my knowledge, no one ever did. And then when I was getting my master's, I had a credit card for the first time in my life because I had a student line of credit. So I could order things from Amazon, which I'd never been able to do before. And it came up on my Amazon recommendations one time. And I was like, it's only $10. Dr. Diva's been telling me to book for years. I might as well. It's so beautiful. Like, it's basically Agatha Christie talking about her seasons at Telbrac with Max Mallowan, the Crown Prince of Archaeology. And the way she talks about so many things are so relatable. Like there's 3 pages where she describes how much she's come to hate the taste of hard-boiled eggs, which I very much relate to, and all that kind of stuff. But at the very beginning, there's a poem called Sitting on a Tell, which is basically her poetical interpretation of Max Mallowan's courtship of her. Ooh. And it is hilarious and brilliant and beautiful. It's so wonderful. As a pair, they are so fascinating individually and together that it was really neat to read her side of it. And also, obviously, as the years have gone on, author archaeologist has become someone I identify with quite strongly.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your archaeology book, 1,000 Nights, which I think, as I said to you, we're friends on Facebook. So, I stalk you every once in a while when you pop up in my newsfeed. And I had seen that you'd written it. And a couple years ago, I was looking for something to read. And I was like, oh, I actually know the person who wrote this. Let's check it out. I'm not going to lie. I'm also a bit of a sucker for Scheherazade tales.
Yeah.
And so I read it, which was an interesting experience. Like, I still really enjoyed the book. I couldn't say it's necessarily that different from reading it from someone that I don't know, but I was definitely, I think when I was reading it, because of our Jordanian shared experience, I was reading it, was like, I totally know where she's getting some of this.
Palace seems very familiar. You're like, yes, it's because it's Ubaid Palace on the Amanzadal. So this is 1,000 Nights. Ooh. It's backward. But it's celebrating its 5th anniversary right now, so I'm pretty pumped. Well, it was always going to be a Middle Eastern fairy tale because it was the Scheherazade retelling.
Yeah.
But I took it out of time. So the actual Scheherazade story is much, much closer to the invention of modern Islam. But like Grimm's fairy tales, it was a collection of stories. So like the Brothers Grimm were wandering around Europe. Yeah. Being like, we've just found this story that conveniently reflects all of our values and everyone already knows it. Let's put it in the book. So like, and so the Scheherazade tales are very similar. They're a collected group of stories that come from all over the place. Like Aladdin's oldest roots are in China. Mm-hmm. Like Sinbad's all over the place. Like it's a lot of combined stuff. But what always fascinated me was the actual frame story itself. The idea of this girl who marries the king and manages not to die. In the official, real versions of the story, she tells stories for 1,001 Nights, which is long enough to have 3 children, which she does. Mm-hmm. And then he's like, you know what? You're pretty smart. The kids are cute. I'm over the whole homicidal rage thing. And they all lived happily ever after. And I remember being like, I have several follow-up questions. Like, he literally wanted to kill you for 3 years and you're okay with this? Like, so I wanted to kind of write a fairy tale that was centering her. So the story was about her instead of she being about all the stories. Mm-hmm. I knew for a variety of reasons, I wanted to set it as far back in history as I could. So I went to the late Middle Bronze Age, and they're kind of inventing the Iron Age a little bit early, is the plot of the book. Like the magic is allowing them to invent the Iron Age a little bit early. But it meant I got to write like the deserts I knew, and in some cases the buildings I knew, a lot of the artifacts that I'd held or seen, sort of. And I also got to play with the language a little bit. Took biblical Hebrew. It was a seminary class, so the first 3 semesters were all biblical Hebrew with the actual Bible. One of the things I remember about Hebrew and Arabic as a language is that often when you translate them into English, there's like the normal way to translate it. And then there's like the pretty way to translate it.
Yeah.
One of the words that I always love the most is mumkin. Technically just means maybe. But if you translate it like into high style, it's if Allah gives me the strength. And so when I sat down to write 1,000 Nights, I was like, I want it to be that second linguistic base. So it's like, Abraham's never going to look up and see the angel telling him not to kill Isaac. Abraham's going to lift up his eyes and see the angel and telling him not to kill Isaac. And so I always picked that sort of verbose when I was writing the style of this book as a sort of shout out to the linguistics. It's not an actual Arabic speaking culture. They're like proto something, I don't know. I wanted them to have that cadence, the sort of that feeling you get when the sun goes down and the minaret starts singing.
You wanted it to be a bit more like poetic rather than this is just a story and you have to imagine it as you're reading it. Like
Yeah.
it's a story, but it's also a poem.
Yes. Spindle, the sequel, is a little bit less poetic, unless they're telling a story, than it is poetic. I remember when I got my first editorial note back for Spindle, it was, they have names and they use contractions. And I was like, yes, this one's going to be a little bit different. But again, because of that, Spindle let me make jokes about loom weight. There's jokes about bitter vetch and all that kind of stuff in that book that I think if you're a very specific kind of archaeologist, you might find funny.
Last question of the interview. What would you say to encourage or inspire other people to follow in your footsteps?
I think the most important thing to remember is that both archaeology and writing are on the fun side of it's my job. Like when you tell people you're an archaeologist, they're like, oh my God, that's so cool. Or when you tell people they're a writer, they're like, oh my God, that's so cool. And so I think the two things that are important to remember is that it is going to be your job. So you have to like it enough to get paid to do it for the rest of your life, hopefully. There's a bit of a risk when the thing that you love becomes the thing you're paid to do. I've learned. I used to write for fun, and now I get paid to do it. And it took me several years to find a new hobby.
Yeah.
And especially now with today's, hustle gig economy, people are always like, oh, are you going to make money doing this? Anytime you're good at it. So the thing I would tell you, if you're an archaeologist, basically, is to really commit to the niche of archaeology that you're going to love, because you might as well. Everyone has to. And if you're a writer, try to keep it fun for as long as possible, because if someday, who knows, it does become your job, it definitely does shift the way you think about it.
Well, we'll end on that. Thanks for coming on.
Okay. No problem.
It was really nice to catch up with you and have this chat. If you ever want to come back on, you just let me know and we can talk more. I think we're both very chatty people, so it'd be pretty easy to work out.
Okay, so that's it for the interview today, guys. I hope that you enjoyed the interview, that you found it informative, that you maybe learned something that you didn't know before about careers working in archaeology, what you can do with an archaeology degree if you decide not to become an archaeologist. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please put them down in the comment section below. I will try to answer them, or perhaps Kate will be lurking in the background and she will answer some of the comments herself. If you would like to follow myself or Kate on social media, all of our links are down below in the description box of this video. If you'd like to further help support Kate, make sure to check out her novels. I highly recommend all of them, especially 1,000 Nights. I really enjoyed that story. Her newest novel, A Queen's Peril, is a Star Wars book about Queen Padme Amidala. It just came out this summer, so if you want to support her, make sure to check out that book. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more from me, please support my channel by giving me a subscribe and hitting the bell notification, and check out any of the other 60+ videos on my channel. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!